The most consequential US election for the world is going right down to the wire. Who's going to win? Would it be as close as people think? What are the chances for a Republican sweep? What do the numbers that really matter tell us? The US election is now less than 3 weeks away. Most polls said that Kamala Harris is still leading Donald Trump in the presidential race. But can we trust the polls, given that we're so wrong about the last two presidential elections? By the way, did you know that polling errors were even larger in the 2020 election than in the 2016 election? Indeed, according to the American Association for Public Opinion Research, the major professional association of US pollsters, polling errors in the 2020 elections were the highest in 40 years for the national popular vote and the highest for at least 20 years for the state-level vote in presidential, senatorial, and gubernatorial contests. And the error mostly went in the direction of overstating support for Biden and Democratic candidates relative to Trump and Republican candidates. Why have pollsters failed so dismally in the last two presidential cycles? Election polls are only as good as they, 1, capture a representative sample of likely voters, and 2, the poll's respondents provide truthful answers about their voting intentions. The biggest problem facing pollsters in the Trump era is the increase in the so-called non-response bias, the idea that a certain segment of the population may be less likely to participate in a poll. The grim reality for pollsters is that Trump voters are simply less likely to take part in polls, and when they do so, they're less likely to answer the questions truthfully. Why? This could be because they're embarrassed or afraid to admit that they plan to vote for Trump. Some Trump supporters may not trust that the private information they share with pollsters won't be used against them in some way. Some Trump supporters may even want to intentionally mislead the pollsters. Many pollsters tried to correct for this bias in 2020 by adjusting the weights they use for Trump voters. But the fact that polling errors were even larger in 2020 than in 2016 means either the pollsters were not successful or that the polling errors were intentional. Either way, I would be careful not to read too much into what most polls are telling us right now. Instead, I would focus my attention on a handful of polls that have a good track record over the past two cycles. Which polls have been the most accurate in the last two presidential election cycles? Real Clear Politics ranks pollsters according to their average polling errors. In the 2020 election, among multi-state pollsters, Insider Advantage, Susquehanna, and Trafalgar were the most accurate. In the 2016 election, Trafalgar Insider Advantage also finished at the top. To the extent that polls are only as good as their track records, I trust these polls more and would give more importance to their findings. This is not to say that they're the best all-around polls. Indeed, they underperform other polls in the 2022 midterm elections, which likely has to do with the fact that Trump was not on the 2022 ballot. If these polls are more accurate than other polls when Trump is in the race, it is most likely because their polling methodologies are better at dealing with the non-response bias that is very specific to Trump voters. I will leave it to you to read about what these pollsters do differently, but their major focus is to get opinions from those who would not typically participate in political polls and to elicit honest answers from their respondents. So what are those polls telling us about the state of the race at the moment? In Pennsylvania, the most important state in this election, Insider Advantage has Trump leading Kamala by 2 points, while Trafalgar has Trump leading by 3 points. In North Carolina, Insider Advantage has Trump leading by 1 point, while Trafalgar has Trump leading by 2 points. In Michigan, both polls have Trump leading by 2 points. Trump can win the election by winning in these 3 states. What these pollsters find for Georgia are similar, and for Arizona show an even bigger Trump lead. These numbers are still within the margin of error, but they paint a very different picture than that of other polls. For example, the latest New York Times Siena College poll for Pennsylvania has Harris ahead by 3 points. So how do we account for the 6-point spread between the New York Times and the Trafalgar polls? I think the answer lies in the weights used by the New York Times Siena College polls. 52% of the respondents of the New York Times poll said that they voted for Biden in 2020, compared to just 44% of the respondents who said they voted for Trump. That's an 8-point margin. This compares to the real margin in the election of only 1.17 points. In other words, the New York Times Siena College poll massively oversampled the 2020 Biden voters in Pennsylvania. I suspect correcting for this oversampling would bring the New York Times results much closer to the Trafalgar findings. The bottom line is that the most accurate polls in the last 2 election cycles are saying that Trump is currently in the lead. And that is saying a lot. Momentum is a nebulous but widely used term in elections. Personally, I don't care for the term too much. I prefer words like trend and trending to describe rising or declining odds. To decipher trends, we can look at either averages across many polls or single polls over time. The problem with averages is that they tend to lag, especially when the averages are based on a lot of polls with different survey frequencies. This is why when it comes to gauging trends, or if you want to call it momentum, I prefer to look at single polls, especially high-frequency polls that are not too noisy. There are not too many of those around, but the Reuters Ipsos poll fits these criteria. Since Biden quit the race on July 21st, we've had 6 Reuters Ipsos polls. What they show is that Harris moved ahead of Trump by late July and saw her lead increase in August and into September. Her lead peaked at 6 points in the 3rd week of September. Her lead has dropped sharply in October, though. It is now at just 3 points. We can debate why Harris suddenly lost momentum, but the timing does not bode well for her campaign. By the way, at this point of the election in 2020, the Reuters Ipsos poll had Biden ahead of Trump by 10 points. This is why I'm not too surprised by reports that Democrats are between being concerned and freaking out. I suspect Harris' decision to go on Fox and Joe Rogan is a recognition by her campaign that she needs to start taking risks if she's to turn things around. There are other danger signs for Harris. When we look at some of the key demographic groups, Trump is polling better among Latinos than he did in 2016 and 2020. This will help him in battleground states like Arizona and Nevada. A recent New York Times and Siena College poll indicated Harris had only 78% support among black voters, compared to around 90% support for Democrats in recent elections, with men accounting for most of this drop-off. White women historically vote Republican. Over the past 72 years, the majority of white women have voted for the Democratic presidential candidate in only 2 presidential elections. Trump received 53% of their votes in 2020. It is generally assumed that this number will fall in 2024 following the overturn of Roe versus Wade. Given Trump is doing better among blacks and Latinos than in 2020, Harris' best chance is to pick up votes of white women. While Harris leads Trump among white women with a college degree, a recent PBS News NPR Marist poll shows Trump holding a 13-point lead among non-college educated white women. This will help Trump in Pennsylvania and Michigan. The same poll shows that Harris is not doing better among college-educated white females than college-educated white males, suggesting that abortion rights may not be as big a deal in this election as is thought by the Democrats. I argued 3 months ago that the only Democrat that might be able to beat Trump is Gretchen Whitmer. I have not changed my mind. Indeed, polling results over the past few weeks have only strengthened my confidence that Trump will win on November 5th, and probably handily. The voting change introduced by North Carolina this week for the 25 counties hit by Hurricane Helene have alleviated my concerns that voter turnout among Trump supporters will be affected by the hurricane. What about control of Congress? Given Sheehy is now comfortably leading Tester in Montana, I think the Republicans stand a very good chance in winning back Senate majority. The House is perhaps less clear-cut, but we have to go back to 1984 when the Republicans won the presidency and the Senate but did not win the House. My prediction is that Trump will win, and I think there's a fairly good chance that we will have a Republican sweep. This should mean higher equities, higher rates, and higher US dollar, at least up to the inauguration day. It needs to be said that my prediction that Trump will win is conditioned on the assumption that he will make it to election day safely. An assumption that I do not take for granted, as I explained in an earlier video. Too many people don't want to see Trump return to the White House. The only question is how far they're willing to go to stop him. I'm afraid I don't know the answer to that question. Thank you for listening.